Hi, FLC and FLCH students. This is Mrs. Moore, and I'm here to welcome you back to your first full week of high school. Hopefully, you had a wonderful weekend. I'm sure you were exhausted on Friday, so I'm hopeful that you went home to recharge, relax, kind of get yourself refocused so that you can take advantage of this week as best as you can. Today, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the tip of the day. And you'll find that most days throughout the course of the school year, you will either see a tip of the day projected on the whiteboard like you're looking at right now with the active reading. You'll notice that it'll have sort of the subject that you'll be looking at here, and you're going to have the date right next to it. So that'll be what you write at the top of the page. Then you'll have the suggestions or the rules that will be listed there. Some days it will be a grammar rule, like I will give you an example of one way to use commas properly, or how to use a semicolon, or how to use a colon, or we'll look at the difference between affect and effect and various words like that, or just little tiny things that come up along the way. I have a long list of them, but I always kind of pause my plans if I see something within the course of the curriculum where a lot of people are making the same mistakes, and I adjust what I'm doing to make sure that our tips of the day are relevant to what's going on in the classroom. You'll then see that information written here, and the majority of the time it's going to be pretty short. This might actually be the longest tip of the day you have the whole entire year, so I'm sorry that we're starting with that. But active reading is such a vital skill, and I wanted to make sure that we start with that so that you have as much time as possible to practice it. The reason why I like to start with active reading, or I like to start talking about active reading at the beginning, is because most of the time when I have freshmen come to me and I say, here, make sure you actively read this and bring it in, they bring in a document with random highlighted passages. It'll be phrases, sentences. Sometimes they'll bring huge blocks of text that have been highlighted. And when I ask them to explain to me why they've highlighted the passages that they've highlighted, most of the time they're unable to do so. And sometimes it's because they remembered the period before it was due and decided to just randomly throw some highlighter on there so it looks like they read it, and that way it wouldn't look like they didn't do their homework. Other times they genuinely read the piece that they were asked to read, and they thought about the passages, and during the time they read the article or the story, the passage they highlighted was important and there was a reason why they marked it. However, they can no longer remember that because they're not in the same frame of mind that they were in when they sat down to do the reading. And so I would say that's what happens most of the time. And so these strategies here, I think, really kind of prevent that from happening, because when that happens, then you have to go back and reread it, and then you're rereading it, trying to figure it out. And then even if you reread it and understand what it says, you can't remember why you highlighted the passage and it drives you crazy. So then you go and reread it again. And I find that even though it takes much longer to practice active reading the first time you read a document, if you do a good job with it, it will stick with you. You'll be able to retain what you read. It'll be much easier to look at the way you coded it and use the information in that article without having to reread it 1,000 times. So it saves you time in the end. Here are the steps along the way that I'd like you to think about. Step number one is to consider how the text that you've been given connects to what you're studying. Teachers will not give you a random assignment that does not have any correlation with what's going on in class. If the assignment or if the text seems random, then ask yourself to kind of go back through what you've done thus far, or look at your class outline or class syllabus to see what's going on in class the next day, to see if maybe it's to prepare you for what will happen the next day. But if you get to the end of class the following day and you still have no idea how that text connects to whatever it is that you're doing in the classroom, that would be a really good indicator to you that you need to kind of step aside and talk to the teacher and clear that up, because there would be no reason why you would have sort of random passages thrown in there, and there's going to be a gap that you need to make sure that you address in that area. So that's number one. Number two, I ask students to highlight unfamiliar words and learn them. Oftentimes, you'll get into a situation where students read over words that they don't know. They're in a time crunch. They have a certain amount of space in their day to read a particular piece, and if they start reading and realize there are words in there they're not familiar with, then they try to read over them and get the general gist of what the article says and move on. It takes time to look up words, and they just don't want to bother with it. And while I completely understand the sentiment and the time crunch, one thing I will say is that looking up those unfamiliar words can help you in several ways. from a very basic standpoint, it obviously can help you understand an article. I often find that when students misunderstand what they've read, it often is because they misunderstood the words that they didn't stop to look up and learn. But from another level, I know most of you have a really deep desire to do well in the ACT and the SAT, and the more words that you learn, the more words you're familiar with, the better you're going to do on the verbal section. So from that standpoint, it would be really helpful. And then from a larger life standpoint, the more words that you start committing to your own memory and that you become familiar with, the better you can communicate how you feel. You can communicate your thoughts more effectively, you can communicate your emotions more effectively, and you're able to comprehend the things that you read much better as you expand your knowledge of what it is that of the English language. So I encourage you to look it up. You have apps on the phone, whether it's the Merriam-Webster app or dictionary.com, plug it in, look it up, and then jot the definition in a short phrase of what it means. Do not write it out word for word. Make sure you actually understand what the definition means as you look at the context of the sentence and then define it on the page. Number 3, underline important sentences. And by important, it could mean several things. It could be connections. So as you're reading a piece, if you notice that it connects to something you've talked about in class, something else you've read, maybe even another class that you're taking, jot those connections down, underline the passage, and write in the margins exactly what it connects to. So connects to global history, connects to Rousseau, connects to To Kill a Mockingbird, connects to whatever it is that you're noticing a connection with. You can do something with that later, and you might want to do something with that later, but it'll be much harder to locate it if you don't mark it and you don't mark why you marked it. So that's why the margin notes are important. Important could also mean it's a powerful statement. So as you read, you might read something and think, ah, wow. And you might not have heard anything like that stated quite as clearly before. It might be something you disagree with. It might be something that disagrees with something else that you read. It might be a statement that makes you think about something in a way you've never thought about it before. And so when you read passages like that, you want to mark them and kind of write in the margins why it is that you have been sort of stopped in your tracks by those words. And then the third thing is just good writing. For those of you who love books, who love writing, who love reading, every time you might enjoy this, every time I read something and it really inspires me, or it moves me, or it makes me want to just go back and read it again and again because it's written so beautifully and I want to try to model the way I write after it, I mark it. And it might not have anything to do with an assignment, but it certainly has something to do with making me a better writer and a better reader. And so I think it's important to do that too. And I'll just mark it and I'll write in the margins inspiring or lovely or whatever my gut response is. And I know that particular passage was underlined because of how beautifully it was written. Number 4 here says to star the main idea when you find it, and I put a little asterisk there to kind of emphasize that. But this is really important. If you read something and you have no idea what the main idea is, if you can't put it aside, look up and tell the person next to you a summary of what you read, then you didn't understand what you read. And I tell people every year, scanning your eyes over something from beginning to end is not reading. Reading is an interactive thing. The text is not flat. You need to ask questions of it as you go. You need to connect parts of it to other parts of it. You need to figure out what the goal the writer has when they sat down and what the writer had when they sat down and they put the piece together. And if you get to the very end and you have not been able to see how it fits together like that, then you read very superficially and you're not going to be able to make much meaning out of what you just read. So when you get to the end, look for the main idea. If you haven't found it, go back and reread it again now that you're semi-familiar with parts of it and see if you can uncover it. If you can uncover it, then make sure you talk to your teacher. And one of the things that I would say helps the most is to jot any questions or confusions you have in the margins. When I have students who come up and say, I didn't understand this, and they can't guide me at all to where they kind of got lost, then it's really hard to help. And one of the things that I sometimes have students do is I say, all right, this is really a difficult story or a difficult text. I want you to highlight everything you do understand. So as you go along and the sentence makes sense and you can follow it, highlight it. And usually what ends up happening is that students will see that there really isn't a lot that has been confusing, that it's really kind of isolated to certain areas. And once they realize that they actually understood most of it, but in order to understand all of it, they need to clear up some confusion, and they're able to identify where that confusion is, it's much easier for a teacher to give you really good direction to help you do that. So as you read, if you read something and it just seems like it's a foreign language, it makes no sense whatsoever, mark it. If you go along, sometimes your questions might not be confusions. The best things you can write in the margins are challenges. So sometimes I'll ask questions of the author, or I'll ask questions of the text, or I'll disagree with what's in the pieces that I'm reading because of something else, and that kind of can overlap with the connections. But asking questions of the text is a really good way to think. It's a really good way to start synthesizing or pulling together multiple documents and making meaning from the way that they work together, which is a really high level skill, and it's something that we're really going to try to work on a lot this year. The last thing here is to check for understanding, reread if necessary, and I mentioned that with number 4 with the main idea. This is really, really important. It's not okay to read something and not get it and then put it down and walk away. The more of the habit you get into of doing that, the easier it becomes to do it, and eventually down the line, you're going to find that it sort of steamrolls a little bit and it builds up, and you've got this kind of domino effect where you feel like you're so far away from what's going on and everything else is collapsed, and it's hard to recover from that. And so, as I mentioned with the course overview, the smartest thing in the world that you can do is to advocate for yourself. And if you find yourself getting buried or overwhelmed or confused, speak up. Do not let it get out of control. And it will never get out of control if you do that. And so, try to give it 2 reads, and if you're stuck, then that's when you need to ask for help. So this is our tip of the day for active reading. Hopefully that was helpful. I don't know how much of that you've heard before. I know you took reading in middle school, so hopefully some of that's review. Hopefully some of it's new, and it will help you become better readers. What I would like for you to do now is to take out the article you were asked to read over the weekend, and I would like you to think about it through the lens of what we just talked about. Did you actively read your article? Where did you fall short? Where could you have done better next time? Okay, I want you to kind of take a minute or two to think a little bit about that. And then Mr. German will chat with all of you about your reaction to the process. Thank you so much. I hope you guys have a really great day. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.